This is the best of Dr. Jerome Corsi on the Truth Central.
This is Dr. Jerome Corsi. Thank you for joining us on The Truth Central. You can find me on X at CorsiJerome1. You can find me on Substack. It's JeromeCorsiPhD.substack.com. We have a guest today, a very special guest today, and I'm very pleased to have with us Dr. Edward Fogarty. He's an MD. And Ted, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Yeah.
We're going to have Ted. I got to know Ted in an unusual way. I mean, after I wrote my JFK book, that Ted's got a copy of it. It turned out that early on, I had been in touch with Robert Kennedy Jr., and the candidate for president. And I had let him know that this book was forthcoming. I wanted to give him a heads up so he wasn't surprised. He had an advance copy of the book. When the book came out, Robert Kennedy Jr. asked me for a copy of the book, which I got to him right away when it was published in March. And the next thing I know, through a few of the people close to Robert Kennedy, is that I got introduced to Dr. Fogarty. And they said, well, Dr. Fogarty's a radiologist, and he would like to have a copy of your book and check out the work that Dr. Mantik did. As you know, those of you who followed the show, Dr. Mantik was both a PhD in physics and an MD. He's been a practicing radiation oncologist for over 4 decades, which means he's been reading x-rays for cancer patients for over 4 decades. Dr. Mantik is a very brilliant physician, and he has seen the JFK x-rays more than anyone else. He's done optical density measurements of the x-rays, which are millimeter by millimeter, sometimes 1/10 of a millimeter by 1/10 of a millimeter. Measurements of how the light is coming through an x-ray. It's a logarithmic function. It permits you to tell exactly what you're looking at. And Dr. Mantik has concluded that of the 3 remaining JFK skull x-rays from the autopsy, all 3 have been forged to mask evidence of frontal shots, and yet the x-rays show 2 clear evidences. 2 frontal shots can clearly be seen in the x-rays. The x-rays are JFK's skull. The dental records match the dental records in a pre-mortem skull x-ray that JFK had taken while he was alive, and it was archived. It is archived at the JFK Museum in Boston. So I worked with Dr. Fogarty, and we got to Dr. Fogarty all the information. I made sure he got all the original material that I had, including the measurements that Dr. Mantik had taken. And so, Ted, why don't you take the story from there?
Sure. Well, Jerry, I thank God every day that we've met and gotten together over this incredibly powerful and important work of science by Dr. Mantik. He has a bulletproof argument that there's no way possible that there was a bullet that hit JFK from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Repository. And, he's truly, he's one of those patriot physicians that are out in society doing great works for society on behalf of all of us Americans under really some great political duress. And so I will go to my grave always supporting Dr. Mantik's work and your book and your writing project with him. And I was called into this project after you guys had published it by Jack Lansweiler, who he's on the back cover here supporting the book. And Jack and I have been friends for going on 10 years now. And Jack's very close to Bobby Kennedy Jr. He's within his inner circle of scientific advisors. I'm kind of a bit on the periphery, being out in the Texas cattle drive country of western Nebraska and the Dakotas. And so when Jack called and said, hey, we got to get together on this, and we got to have Fogarty vet this whole thing and make sure that it's airtight. It was a great honor for me to to do that for Bobby Kennedy Jr. These these art pieces at the back here, those are my mother's works, and they were at the Goethe Institute on the occasion of the 23rd Museum Mile Festival in New York City in June of 2001. And these pieces were hung up in the Goethe Institute right across the street from the Met, where Jackie Onassis Kennedy had her dresses on display for the 23rd Museum Mile Festival that year. And there's a lot of intergenerational history between the Fogartys of the Midwest and the Kennedys of New England, but we can get into that later. I have had the great privilege of really producing some things, some Black Swan case reports over the years out of my academic practice at the University of North Dakota School of Medicine, where I was the chair of radiology. And but this one is really so important to what's going on in America right now, to be able to go through all of the evidence. And to be honest with you, one image diagnosis is all I really needed, because the lateral exam of JFK's skull has this very specific microsphere spray paint pattern of mercury, which is a unique ballistic. It's a very rarely used ballistic, special ops kind of ballistic. And I've been, diving into the literature and finding more and more information about the ballistics of mercury containing bullets themselves. And I'm hoping, down the line here, maybe this summer, I can get together with Dr. Mantik and Dr. Chesser and publish a scientific article on at least the lateral skull exam, showing the mercury bullet ballistic, which is, it's a frontal shot, the shot that's just under the brow line. And, your book just delineates all of this to the nines. That's where Mantik's, 30-year career basically in pulling all of this evidence together is he's a giant that I get to stand on the shoulders of in this next generation of physicians and radiologists to call out the deep state, which you guys have. It's truly an honor and a privilege. And, I'll be going to my deathbed, singing the praises of Dr. Mantik and your facile writing to help him communicate with the world through this book.
Well, Ted, you're very kind. Ted, of course, is as he indicated, his specialty as a MD is radiation. He's a radiation
diagnostic and interventional radiology, and the radiologic sciences. When Dr. Mantik was in training, he's 83 now. He's still in practice, actually. He still does some fill-in work, locums work around the country for radiation oncologists. But there's even a little background between me and him through science, because he trained at the University of Wisconsin for radiologic physics, PhD, and in his training and in his eventual work in medicine as a radiation oncologist, he was a big fan of the man who built the nuclear bomb trigger mechanism, Louis Alvarez, who went to the University of Chicago. And Louis Alvarez was in the same fraternity that I was in at the University of Chicago, obviously in the 40s, and I was out there in the early 90s. But it was actually, and you mentioned this in the book, it was actually his reverence for Louis Alvarez coming out and saying there's really nothing to this whole JFK conspiracy stuff, and that kind of got him interested in really investigating the story further, and that he got to be in the National Archives 9 times and really pulled off. It's a miracle of exhaustive science and this optical density work that he did to prove to the world that, you know, JFK was assassinated by the deep state. And we now see in America, you know, basically 60 years later, that we're under complete control by the deep state. I have garnered the respect of Bobby Kennedy Jr. for many years by being a part of his team, his peripheral, you know, team of vaccine safety experts. And I've had the great blessing of working with Dr. Paul Harch down at LSU on hyperbaric oxygen therapy and hyperbaric air therapy protocols for the reversal of dementia, which I am the first physician on planet Earth to be able to make the claim that I've reversed dementia on air pressure alone, with the addition of some glutathione amino acid precursors. Dr. Harch and I are going to be publishing this case report out of Colorado this summer in Frontiers in Neurology, but it was basically a chamber just like this in a family home that reversed dementia. And my friend Bobby Koska, who has a lake house across the way here out at Lake McConaughey from us, and he ended up and basically started talking and having conversations with his wife within 5 days of the institution of our program in their home. And unfortunately, he eventually, this is occurring in the fall of 2019, and then he got admitted to the hospital in March of 2020 for urinary tract infection and contracted COVID and ended up dying of COVID accelerated dementia after he got out of the hospital, and wouldn't get back into his chamber in his own home. He was afraid of it and was put on all these drugs, and you know how it goes. It's just basically the deep state of big pharma killed the first patient of mine to recover from dementia. And you know, that's where my mission in medicine has been a strange one, and I feel like, you know, guided by Christ above. But I've had all these touch points with these really unusual miracle cases during my career. You know, the Eden Carlson case, if anybody wants to look up what I feel is the most important case in the history of medical case reporting and case writing, it's the Eden Carlson case, where Dr. Harch took a 3-year-old near-drowned baby girl whose brain had shrunk by 20%, MRI verified. I'm the digital scientist who worked up all the MRI images to quantify how much brain loss there was from this anoxic brain injury on Eden Carlson. And then 6 months later, Dr. Harch had recovered her on hyperbaric air therapy at just 30% more air pressure. And, you know, she goes back to Little Rock, Arkansas Children's Hospital, same MRI system. And lo and behold, her brain has regrown by 20%. And she's walking and talking, and she's supposed to be a semi-vegetative kid for the rest of her life. So it's these kinds of serendipitous black swan things that I have been blessed by God above to be the black swan photographer from medical imaging. And so,
well, let me intervene for a couple of minutes here. The Ted and I got together over the JFK book, and I'll show you as we go along what he's talking about with the lateral image and how you can see the frontal shot. But just to our relationship developed as I got to understand that, you know, Dr. Fogarty was in this hyperbaric research and had done these remarkable things with a combination of the hyperbaric chambers, which are chambers, and with this pro-immune
This is the best of Dr. Jerome Corsi on the Truth Central.
I'm still having glutathione.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I said to Ted, look, I've got a website which is called getlongevitymeds.com.
Yeah.
And that's about to launch. Okay, so we're going to start today to build a page on getlongevitymeds.com for Ted Fogarty to be able to offer the hyperbaric research and his treatments. He will actually be able to take patients and treat patients
Yeah.
through this website and offer the supplement
Yes.
that
So
goes
we're
along
going to
with it.
network. We're going to network America together,
Yes.
Dr. Corsi, and so your endeavors in building this, over 1,000 physician mavericks in medicine crowd all across the country who are doing the right thing. They're taking care of people with long, and this is going to be our specialty right off the bat is to take care of people with long COVID. The medical literature is now becoming replete with reports all over the world saying that hyperbaric therapy is the gold standard for recovering people from long COVID. And a lot of that long COVID, as we both know, it's not from the infection itself, it's from the vaccines. But regardless, we've got to get all of these great Americans suffering in society to your webpage, getlongevitymeds.com, and then link them up with these great physicians that you have in your stable, and get them networked together so that we have sites of excellence. For instance, the number one site of hyperbaric excellence that we're going to put on the page is Dr. Harch's clinic down in New Orleans at hbot.com. And then, I've got some other close friends in the hyperbaric world around the country on the coast. Ed DiGirolamo, who's originally from New York, he's a structural engineer who has started the Ex Vita clinic in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina. And he's the force behind HBOT for Heroes, which is getting HBOT out to our veterans who are brain injured. And Dr. Harch actually published the phase 3 proof of the pudding that hyperbaric oxygen therapy is, bar none, the most important and safest way to reverse PTSD and TBI, blast injury in our veterans and get them off the suicide train, which again is coming from big pharma, with the DoD basically passing out these SSRIs like it's candy. And these SSRIs have a black box warning from the FDA not to be given in 20-year-olds because it activates their motives for suicidal ideation into real suicide. And so we've had an ongoing crisis of 20 veterans a day on average taking their own lives because, in my opinion, because they're not getting into hyperbaric therapy. And that's where this whole little niche area of medicine has been suppressed and destroyed by big pharma, by the deep state, since Orville Cunningham, who was the first anesthesiology department medical director at the University of Kansas in the 19-teens and 1920s. He set a precedent for pandemic medicine in 1918 by saving the lives of some of his own physician colleagues who were about to die of Spanish influenza infection, and put him into his big air tank at the University of Kansas, basically a 40-foot long, 8-foot diameter multi-place chamber that could only, at the time, they could only use air pressure vessels. And now the modern multi-place chambers, they're still air pressure vessels, but they pipe in oxygen through respiratory lines, just like these small chambers do. I call them the ultralights of Aircraft HBOT .org mission. We have an entire game plan, an entire Manhattan Project that I'm basically the key link in the middle across America that's combining these glutathione amino acid precursors, which are patented in Canada as an antiviral supplement by Dr. Crum in February of 2020, and any version of hyperbaric therapy absolutely is the end all of all pandemics, really. There's no viral infection that can tolerate a cell that has high levels of glutathione and or high levels of intracellular oxygen dissolved because of the hyperbaric therapy systems. And through my communications on AM radio stations across the Great Plains since 2020, I've communicated these protocols out to basically the people of the Dakotas, Nebraska, Iowa, and Colorado, and saved an untold number of lives. I mean, it's very simple. We have all learned now through this whole thing, and to the point that Chris Cuomo is even coming out and saying mea culpa. I've been on ivermectin for long COVID, and that's going to be part of our protocols too on getlongevitymeds.com. It's a fairly uniform protocol of ivermectin, the glutathione amino acid precursors, and that also actually works into a cancer prophylactic protocol set that will have a little bit of minor variations from the long COVID protocols. But we are in great need of getting the word out across the country through the network of physicians who can be trusted advisors to all these people that are going to come to getlongevitymeds.com and get into these amino acid precursor medicine protocols. And if that doesn't work well enough for our patients in our telemedicine practice, then they're going to be advised to either come back to me, and I will get them a chamber for their own home. And I'm licensed in over 20 states in the union through my teleradiology practice, or we're going to get them to these incredible docs in the hyperbaric realm. There's a group out in Philly that could help the whole Eastern Seaboard at the Oxygen Oasis, and I've been an advisor and consultant to that clinic for years too. And so we're gonna bring all these people together, and in part it's something that I know myself I could have never dreamed of having this opportunity to network the nation without you. So thank you, Jerry.
Well, this is going to be, so hyperbaric, HBOT is hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And these are chambers. You've got one, Ted, right behind you, right? Can you
Yep.
kind of move aside? We'll see, show us what it looks like. It's just one of these home units.
Yeah, it's a home unit. Just runs on a simple air compressor, and it seems a little claustrophobia producing, which that's one of the issues where we are going to have some people who are just going to have to go to the big chambers at Ex DeVita and out at Oxygen Oasis because of claustrophobia. But the average person, if they're gently coached, which is what I do on telemedicine links around the Great Plains, and I've collected about 20 dementia recoveries in the homes of farmers and ranchers in the Dakotas and Nebraska since this Bobby Koska case in 2019 and 2020. And I also set up a COVID MASH unit on the basis of the North Dakota CARES Act grant funding that I received from the Ag Commissioner of North Dakota, who is the head of the leftover funds from the CARES Act grant. North Dakota got $15 million to spend for the pandemic fight, and the last $500,000 I was in competition with two major international biotech companies and got a little $50,000 grant to basically write up these protocols, come together with a formulation of an enhancing ProImmune using beetroot powder and spirulina powder mixed into the ProImmune, and then that itself, the purple powder, is kind of a lights out save for a lot of people, where I've gotten people with COVID overnight feeling better by the next day by just having them take basically a scoop of this every 2 hours through the night and some spirulina and some beetroot powder, which then opens up the blood vessels for the ProImmune to get in and basically shut down all the viral replications in our endothelium, that's a unique part of this whole COVID infection, It's not really infecting our lungs and our nasal passages per se. It's not the respiratory epithelium that are really getting infected. It's more the vascular side, the small capillaries and endothelium. And so the spike protein actually becomes super glue for all of our capillaries. And, in New York City medicine, in early of 2020, there's, a young ICU doc saying that this really looks like mountain sickness at some level. And it really kind of is, because you're blocking in a different mechanism, but you've got super glue of spike protein going through your tissues and into your brain and into your heart. And so what's the easiest way to bypass a blockage of blood flow? It's a hyperbaric chamber. I don't need to intubate you as a physician. I can put you gently into a hyperbaric oxygen tank or a hyperbaric air chamber and pipe in oxygen. And the basic physics of that is that every single breath you take, for instance, in the NYU phase 1 trial back in May of 2020, they basically had the answer in May of 2020 in New York at NYU. You have a 2-atmosphere hyperbaric oxygen tank, and you take somebody who's 20 minutes away from having to be on a ventilator, you stick them in the tank, and then every breath that they take versus just breathing outside in the air of New York City, which has 20% oxygen and is at 1 atmosphere, every time you take a breath in a 2-atmosphere, 100% hyperbaric oxygen chamber, you have 10 times the amount of oxygen that is going into your entire body. And the beauty of gases, and medicinal gases in particular, like oxygen or the noble gases, helium, and these other gases, is that they don't respect any boundaries. These gases, oxygen in particular, they're actually, it's not like your red blood cell is actually by hand feeding the rest of the body a molecule of oxygen. What actually is happening is the red blood cells set up a gradient inside the capillaries, and when they squeeze a little bit through the capillaries, they drop off the oxygen in the plasma, and that creates a downhill gradient through which the oxygen just flows by diffusion into the rest of the cells that need the oxygen. So when you're in a hyperbaric chamber at 2 atmospheres, 100% oxygen, you now have 10 times as much oxygen in that blood plasma. That gradient is now 10 times stronger. It's like basically taking a little, 3-foot waterfall in the Catskills and comparing it to Niagara Falls. This is a huge amount of oxygen that is now available to diffuse into every part of the body. And then our mitochondria are then no longer starved of oxygen, and then they start to produce energy, increase glutathione. The increased glutathione then shuts down the viral replication cycles. And if you look at COVID as basically a stroke model at some level, we should have long ago had hyperbaric oxygen chambers in every emergency room and ICU in this country to take care of people who are coming in with heart attacks, MIs, the strokes, to basically brute force saturate their entire body, their entire brain, their entire heart with oxygen that then the mitochondria and the cells can then use to stay alive while the body breaks up that clot on its own very gently.
Yeah, the mitochondria are these remarkable structures inside a cell that manufacture all kinds of positive things. And so therefore, what you're saying is the glutathione, I still have to work on pronouncing that correctly. Glutathione gets into the cell and rejuvenates the mitochondria, which then starts a very positive process of antioxidant activity in the cell itself. And so
so basically every time we take a breath, even normal baric breath, our bodies are taking that oxygen, processing in the mitochondria, and a little bit of the gentle reactive oxygen species, even from every breath we take or when we're exercising, that is actually a little bit of a spark to the cell saying, hey, we need more of these glutathione amino acid precursors inside of the cell so that the cell can manufacture the glutathione. And then and then it can go out from inside of the cell to the outside of the rest of the body and pick up, all of these toxins, heavy metal toxins, all sorts of toxins, basically the final common pathway for detoxification in the body. And this goes back really, as Dr. Albert Crum, my mentor in glutathione and mitochondrial medicine, loves to proselytize, is that we have 3 billion years of evolutionary history and clinical trials at the unicellular level, and going into the complicated organisms that we are from God above, showing that this is the final common pathway of all toxins. Is really it's glutathione carries these toxins out of the cell, and there's really not any species, walking, talking, swimming, flying, or even plants, that aren't completely dependent on glutathione. And it's my opinion that that's all been kind of scrubbed from the record in the clinical training of physicians in this country going back 100 years. But more specifically, I can really point to a suppression of the truth of hyperbarics in the history of medicine that goes it even rolls right back into the Kennedy family, because when Jack Kennedy and Jackie had their last child in August of 1963, Patrick Bouvier Kennedy, he was a premature baby that there was some work going on with him when he was premature, and he was transported to Boston, and he was put into a hyperbaric chamber. And I can tell you from this point in history and time, knowing what I know with Dr. Harch's work and our use of air therapy on Eden Carlson, Patrick was put into too high of an oxygen pressure vessel. There's too much oxygen, and babies, and especially neonates, are so oxygen sensitive that when they're in the NICU, even, we don't give them 100% oxygen. All of the NICUs in this country have a blended oxygen coming off the wall that's only 40%, so that there's not too much oxygen getting into these very sensitive vessels of these neonates. They clamp down immediately, and then it creates problems like premature retinopathy and hyaline membrane disease of the lungs. And just looking through the history of Patrick Bouvier's Kennedy's care, I can see from 60 years later that he got too much oxygen in a hyperbaric system in Boston. It was a valiant effort, but I think it ended up causing his demise. And APGAR and the whole NICU crowd of New England was actively producing fraudulent science in dogs to show that hyperbaric chambers for neonates doesn't work. And the great Alan Bluxom, actually, of Houston, Texas, and St. Joe Hospital, in 1949, he devised and built a baby hyperbaric chamber that only went up 2 pounds per square inch, which is only 15% more pressure, and it never used 100% oxygen. It only used 60% oxygen blended into the tank, and that ended up saving a lot of blue babies in the 1950s on all the military bases. And so there's this whole historical, really, truly incredible story that's been covered up and actually disparaged. If you look at any of the modern writings about Orville Cunningham, even, he's been disparaged in the modern medical era in the last 20 to 30 years for having brought in this hyperbaric stuff that doesn't work, and it killed people. And it's egregious fraud in science that, again, with Dr. Mantik, I'm here to be an attorney for the truth in imaging, and with Dr. Harch, the truth in imaging of hyperbaric therapy, which is God's greatest gift of physics to medicine and all of us on planet Earth, in my opinion. And to the point that, your hometown of Cleveland once had a 5-story hyperbaric hospital It was built by Timken Ball Bearing Company for Orville Cunningham in the 1920s. And Orville Cunningham was curing all sorts of ailments in Cleveland in this giant hyperbaric facility, which was a marvel of engineering. I mean, even to today's standards, phenomenal marvel of engineering. And the AMA basically came out and had to reputationally destroy Orville Cunningham to shut that down in the 1930s, so that the whole drug complex could get off the ground, because Orville Cunningham was basically curing MS and all sorts of ailments that nobody had any fix for in the monotherapeutics of modern pharmacy and medical approaches. And that's another thing that, through our telemedicine crowd, we're going to be empowering all these physicians to understand the concept of pleiotropic medicines that work in many ways. And that's how Dr. Crum got his first patent from the U.S. Patent Office, was in describing the pleiotropic mechanisms, the many ways in which glutathione can help our cellular biology, and is also innately linked into a process that has only in the last 10 years getting any kind of scientific coverage. But if you go into PubMed, our nationally funded, taxpayer-funded database, there's two things that I would hope that everyone listening to me could do. But go into PubMed and do a search on Fauci and glutathione, and you'll see 3 reports will come up. And these actually are evidence that Tony Fauci in 1991 had already figured out that intracellular glutathione manufacturing was nature's purest and simplest and safest and cheapest way to have an antiviral system. And, in modern medicine, and I've been using NAC in emergency radiology for 25 years now, to help protect kidneys from increased contrast doses in people who have bad kidneys. NAC is the primary singular glutathione amino acid precursor, also trade named Mucomyst or Acetadote. All of our ER docs in this country, especially during COVID, are dealing with people trying to kill themselves on Tylenol overdoses from COVID despair. And so what are they using to rescue these livers? High doses of NAC, glutathione amino acid precursors, that Tony Fauci in 1991 proved are a perfectly safe antiviral in an HIV model. And Stanford University came out in the mid-1990s. When I was in medical school at UNMC in 1997, they are showing significant life improvement, quality of life improvement, decreased full-blown AIDS expression in patients who are taking a daily supplement of glutathione amino acid precursors in the form of NAC. Dr. Crum did some head-to-head research with Charles Drew University and the traditional African-American medical colleges starting back in 2011, where he showed that his formulation, Proimmune Immune Formulation 200, is actually much better and more effective than NAC alone. And it just makes sense, because this is actually Mother Nature's recipe for glutathione intracellular synthesis. And so there's a lot of research that's piled in around the world, even for COVID and using NAC. And there's only been 1 or 2 negative reports, and one of those came from Brazil, where they used way too much NAC and basically created a deficit of the other 2 amino acids in these patients with COVID in Brazil. And they didn't show a benefit in this high dose NAC protocols for COVID. But interestingly, right at the same time, Argentina did a study where they took their 4-drug regimen, including steroids and azithromycin and some others, and compared that 4-drug regimen with an augmented mild hyperbaric protocol of just 5 1-hour treatments of 1.4 atmospheres of hyperbaric pressure, which is just a little bit above what this chamber can do. And they showed a huge benefit life-saving benefit. But more importantly, and you're going to love this from the economic side, they were able to, in Argentina, by augmenting their COVID care regimen with an additional 5 one-hour treatments of hyperbaric therapy, they got people out of the hospital in 3 days versus 9 days on their routine protocols. And so when you look at this from an economic standpoint and where we are, Jerry, right now in America, and we're tanking, I don't see how America ever comes back from this medical deficit, this medically inspired trashing of the economy without hyperbaric chambers in every home and in every hospital. And my good friend Ed DiGirolamo and his team, we wrote up this grand plan at aircrafthbot.org for the use of jetliners as COVID mass units. And every jet in this country, every day or so, is undergoing a pressure check, a cabin pressure check, where an industrial air compressor is hooked right into the jet. And then the jet is basically pressurized to 1.5 atmospheres, which is the same level of pressure that we used in the veterans suicidal ideation and PTSD recovery protocols. Then there's crew members inside that jet that are actually experiencing 1.5 atmospheres of room air pressure and checking for leaks on the inside, and there's crew members on the outside checking for leaks. And so, we literally have an entire nation of boneyards of old jets, even, retired in 2020, that could be converted immediately into hyperbaric chambers for the entire country. And this next pandemic has, it's a matter of politics, not actual science or engineering.
We have to move on to the next one right now. You and I have another conference which we have to go to, so we're going to have to wrap this up. But
yeah,
the point is, Dr. Edward Fogarty, Ted, is going to be with us on GetLongevityMeds.com. We're going to have the hyperbaric treatment. We're going to have the ProImmune supplement, and our next call is to put
ivermectin. And we're going to make it real easy for people in America to get access to all these protocols and through your telemedicine project. And it's just a no-brainer. It's time to get it out to the world and to the country in particular.
So we're now our next Zoom meeting, our next meeting is going to be implement this, and we're going to do that right now. So, Ted, thank you for joining us. We'll do much more. Dr. Jerome Corsi with TheTruthCentral.com. Thank you for joining us. In the end, God always wins. God's going to win here too. That's how we got together. That's how we got together.
That's right.
Okay, thank you all for joining us. We'll be back. God bless.